Well, thank you so much, both Priscilla and Pastor Joey. It's really an honor to be here. And it's just every time I spend time with these people, it reminds me of God's provision. And so I'm really excited because we're going to, a little later, dive into Exodus. We're going to read the whole chapter. It's going to be great. But it's really neat to see the way that the Lord is working, especially in Priscilla's prayer. I don't think she knew it, but she hit all the key points in my sermon today. But I'm really excited for that. And I do just want to take a moment to express my appreciation for both Pastor Jay and Pastor Joey, because they've both they've really extended their hearts to me, and then they've surrendered their pulpit to me. They both, Pastor Jay this week and Pastor Joey in a few weeks, in Common Ground. And so I think it's one of the most extraordinary acts of kindness that a pastor can do is to extend their pulpit, especially to young people. So I'm very deeply appreciative of that, and I look forward to our time together. And so as we start, I'm going to read through the entire chapter of Exodus 16. It's about 36 verses. I didn't want to do that to Priscilla, so I figured we would just start with that today. There's a lot in it, and there's a lot going on, but it's really special. It's become one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. So we're going to go ahead and start in chapter 16. They set out to Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. Notice that is the name of the place where they're at, not an action, which I find to be quite interesting. It says, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat and ate meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Man, they were just brought out of deliverance, or they were just brought into deliverance from Egypt, and they literally are telling Aaron and Moses, you are here to kill us because we're going to starve. I just can't believe that. When I read that, and I'm not going to lie, my heart broke a little bit, because sometimes I think when God delivers me, I'll sometimes complain and go, it was so much better in my last season. But I can't believe they did that, but I love this. It says, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven, for you and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may rest with them, whether they will walk within my law or not. On the 6th day they will prepare what they will bring in, and it will be twice as much as they gathered daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. I love that too. They literally grumbled against the Lord. Not only did he hear them, he could have chose not to, right? I do that too. I have a very selective ear when I want to, but not only did he hear them in their grumbling, he acknowledged it, and he provided them bread in the morning. It says, for what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening to eat will be meat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation, to the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of my people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was a face of the wilderness, a fine flake, a flake-like thing, frost as fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, I love this, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And when Moses said to them, it is the bread of the Lord, and he has given it for you to eat. What the Lord commanded Moses was this, gather it, each one of you, as much as he can eat, that you shall take an omer. That's going to be really important. An omer is 1 day's worth of provision or food. He says, take an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could, and ate. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over till morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some of them left it out till the morning, and it bred, I love this, it bred worms and it stank. That didn't have to be included, but I think it's kind of cool that it is. They bred worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it and ate as much as he could eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. I also find that really fascinating, that by the time the sun grew hot, the manna would melt. But it says, on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each, and when the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord had commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. I think some of us may need to hear that today, right? That we should have a holy Sabbath, a day devoted to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. So the only day that they could keep manna and keep it overnight, kind of stockpile it, was on Sundays, because the Lord commanded them to. Moses said, eat it today, and today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments of the law? Because some of them went out, and they were still looking for the bread on the 7th day. And the Lord said, how long will your people refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you 2 loaves. Or 2 omers, right? Remain each of you in this place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day, so that people rested on the 7th day. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like a coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Isn't that interesting? I really wish that we could have manna today. At least one day we could just taste it, right? But I find that really interesting. It says, Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded you. This is super important. Don't miss this. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they will see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. And the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. So I know that was a little bit of a doozy. That was a lot. But I really do love this chapter. And I had a lot of fun when I was preparing my sermon, because I kind of just went to all of my favorite theologians and looked at what they had to say. And so I merged that with some of my own understandings of it. And so I'm excited for what I have found in this text for you today. So I found in my John Wesley, I have a Wesley study Bible. I use it a lot. I really love it. And John Wesley said, and I think this is a summary for the entire chapter. So if you space out for all of that, it's completely okay, because John Wesley summarized it in this. He says, the bread of heaven sustained God's people in the wilderness for 40 years, and that is a testimony to God's faithfulness and provision. And I really resonated with that, and I really appreciated that John Wesley made an effort to say that. So to set up kind of what was happening here, for years, the God's people, they'd been looking in multiple directions to get their daily needs met. They were under Egyptian oppression and slavery for a very long time. But one of the things that happened when they were under Egyptian slavery and oppression was that they actually looked around to see provisions, right? So they could look down at the crops to see food growing for their land, or they could look out onto the fields and they could see the available livestock that could eventually be used as food for them. So especially when it came to food, they were very used to looking around, but never quite looking up. And that's going to be a key thing here in a little bit. But it even said, when I was doing some research, that they would actually look to their Egyptian slave owners or their masters in order to be told what they could eat and when they could eat it. So they were very restricted and didn't have a whole lot of choice on their own when it came to regards of food. But now God has taken them out of Egypt and those lands, and those things that they were naturally used to doing were no more, right? They were technically free, but they were out of Egypt. And one of my favorite theologians said this, but as long as their routines are chained to their habits as slaves, their thoughts were changed to what they did as slaves, and their actions were chained to what they did as slaves, they will never truly experience freedom. Isn't that interesting? But if you read back in Exodus, you'll see even after they were delivered out of Egypt, they still had a tendency to do the things that they did in Egypt because it was just habit. They were so used to it. But even when they were free, right, even when they got into the desert, they were still practicing the things that they did as slaves. Isn't that interesting? John Wesley again said God could take the people out of Egypt, but not the Egypt out of the people. I really thought that was interesting. One of my favorite theologians, Lisa Turker, she says, real freedom won't occur with just an external relocation, but it requires a complete internal renovation. I had to read that a few times before it sunk in, but what she's saying is real freedom won't occur with just an external relocation, right? It won't just happen from moving. They could be moved from Egypt to this desert and nothing was going to happen until there was a complete internal renovation, something done in their hearts, right, in their minds. But I just find God to be brilliant. I mean, how smart is it for he to take up their most basic daily need, which was food, in order to get them to change their hearts, right? For this internal renovation. Their most basic daily need is what God chose to show his provision and his goodness and his love. So get this, this is really important. It says they would no longer have to look out or around to have their needs met. They would actually have to look up. And we're going to look at why, but manna was raining down from heaven. So they, for once in their lives, they never looked out or down at the fields. There was nothing growing in that land, right? They were in the desert. There was nothing growing. There were no livestock in the fields. There were no fields. For the first time in their lives, they would have to look up to see their needs being met. It says in Scripture, their food would come down from him and him alone, and he would rain down just enough bread each day to sustain them. And so as we see from that, they had to develop a new habit and a new way of thinking, right, to get their food. It wasn't asking, can we have this, or when may we eat? It was looking up and finding what they needed raining down on them. And I think part of the reason God did that was to remind them that they were no longer a slave people, right? They did not belong to Egypt anymore. They were God's people, and God's people needed to learn to look to him, right? I think we forget that today. I know I sometimes do. But I think it's interesting, especially, I'm really big on intertextuality. I'm taking a class right now with a Christian studies professor who teaches both ethics and theology, and we learn in class how to connect Old Testament text to New Testament text, or vice versa. And I think one of the reasons I love the Old Testament so much is because I think we're biblically illiterate in the Old Testament. We, as in you, me, and the church today, I don't think we read it enough. I don't think we preach from it enough, and I don't think that we understand it, which really sets us up for failure in a certain aspect, because when you read the New Testament, you can understand it, but if you don't understand what it's referencing, you're missing half of it. But I still think the Bible is incredible because I think it's the only book that you can read having no context and still understand it. But it makes a difference when you know the context. So this is interesting. God said that he was going to test his people, right, to see if they would follow his commandments. I'm going to give you all homework. I want you to read, and you don't have a choice. You're going to read John 6, okay? And you're going to read the whole thing. It's about 70 verses, and you're going to read it. And it is the feeding of the 5,000 according to John, and it is also the bread of life discourse. So in the book of John, there is no Last Supper. So the Eucharist, which is elements of the Last Supper and Last Supper, the Eucharist is not in one spot at the end of John's gospel like it is in the Synoptic Gospels. It is spread out throughout his entire gospel. Elements of this Last Supper are not found in one spot at the end. It's actually spread out through the entire gospel. And so when you read John 6 this week, your homework, you'll see that Jesus says the same thing. Philip sees the crowd when Jesus is going to feed the 5,000, and he says, how are we going to pay to feed all of these people? Right? But Jesus tests him to see his faith. And it says Jesus knew what he would do. But God's doing the same thing here as Jesus did in the New Testament. He is testing their faith to see if they will follow his law. It says he will use when the manna comes down, he will use this unique way of providing food to test and see if people will follow his commandments. It's the same thing that Jesus does to Philip. And when you read John 6 this week, you'll see it. And don't just stop after the feeding of the 5,000. Continue on to the bread of life discourse, because in the Gospel of John, that is the Last Supper. That is the Eucharist. When Jesus says, I am the bread of life, we see that in the beginning of his gospel, not at the end, because there is no Last Supper scene. It's really riveting. And this is something that we see in Exodus. We see the start of this, right? The start of the importance of bread in the Bible. And we see the start of what God does with bread. And in that discourse, when you read John 6 this week, you'll even see Jesus says, this is not like the bread that your ancestors ate and died. Jesus says that because he knows that the people who ate this bread eventually died in the Old Testament. But then Jesus goes on to say later in that chapter, I am the bread of life, right? So read it. It's great. Read Exodus 16, read John 6, compare the two. You'll see a lot. I'm writing a paper about it. It's due Thursday, so if you have any insights, let me know. I would really love that. But I do wonder if God still does this today. I know he's not raining down bread from heaven, even though I really wish that he would. I think it would be a really neat thing for everyone today to experience, just to realize that God's going to feed you, whether it's actual bread or it's through your spiritual life, he will feed you. But I do think that he wants us to experience true freedom that comes from depending on him. And I think to do that, we have to look at him and trust that he's going to meet our needs. So I want you all to think about that and perhaps even rest in that this week. But an interesting thing that I did read when I was preparing was this. It says, after 40 years of eating manna in heaven, the Israelites understood the process pretty well, right? They did it for 40 years. They understood how it worked. 6 days of the week, the Lord would rain down manna from heaven. However, here or there would be no bread on the seventh day, for it was a Sabbath. So what would happen is on the sixth day, there would be a double portion, right? So it would rain twice as much as normal for the Israelites to collect a portion or an omer for Saturday, and then their omer for Sunday, right? But it was interesting because they were told not to stockpile the manna. That's when it bred worms and it stank, right? Except for on the Sabbath. That was the one day that they could, on Saturday, they could stockpile, or whenever on the sixth day, they could stockpile their manna, and that was the one time that they were allowed to do that because there would be no manna on the seventh day, right? And so also, before we go on, I want you to think about that. An interesting perspective that hit me yesterday when I was just really resting in this and preparing was I just felt God calling me to think, what is the manna that I'm stockpiling in my life? And I want you to think about that for you too. What is the thing that you are stockpiling in your life that you shouldn't be? What is that thing that you are holding on to and maybe collecting more of? However, what is that thing that is preventing you from seeing God's provision daily? The reason he didn't let them stockpile the manna was because when they did that, they forgot to look to him each and every single day to provide them what they needed, right? And so that's why they weren't allowed to do it, except for on the sixth day. But when I was just preparing and resting my heart in this last night, God asked me, what is it in your life that you're stockpiling that you shouldn't be? And so I want you to think about that. Take that home with you and think about it. But it says it was given to them daily so that they would remember to trust in God and him alone. And so it gets really interesting. This is at the end of the chapter when I said, remember this. It says, God says to them, it's in verse 32. He says, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer be kept throughout your generations so that they may see the bread with which I have fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. An omer, like I said earlier, is exactly 1 day's provision. It is enough for one person on 1 day. And that was their measurement. They called it an omer, okay? They, for years, were instructed not to keep any extra, right? Not to stockpile it. But here, at the end of the chapter, we were told that it is commanded by the Lord that they keep exactly 1 omer, which is exactly 1 day's worth of food, and they keep it for future generations. And that's so important because they were told to do that to make sure that the future generations were reminded that God was their provider even when their ancestors were in the wilderness. Right, so I want you to think, this is my big question. I know I've given you a lot. I've given you homework, right? You're going to read John 6, maybe Exodus 16 again. You're going to think about the manna that you've stockpiled in your own life. What is that? And this is the biggest thing, but this is part of your homework. I want you to seriously take time this week to think what your omer is going to be. What is that thing in your life that you're going to hold on to, and you're going to keep it so that when future generations come, you can say, this is what God gave me. This is a sign of his provision, and this is his goodness and his ability to care for me even when I'm in the wilderness. So I want you to think, I have 2, okay? I have a key. I got a key this weekend, and it was really special to me. And so for me, and I feel at this point in the semester, we've got like 3.5 weeks left. I'm not going to lie. I feel disoriented. I feel like I don't know which way's up and down. I'm questioning if I really have learned anything at all because I'm being asked to regurgitate it, right, in a very academic way. And it's just like, last week I was like, have I even learned stuff? What do I know? And I do, but I'm disoriented, right? And so it's really great to take time to just be still and to think, what is my omer? And I'll tell you, I think I've been in the wilderness a little bit lately. School's been tough, and things have been going wrong, and I'm struggling to see God sometimes. But then you just take time to be still and you see it, right? So my omer is a key, not necessarily because it's a key, but to what it leads to, right? But also, your omer doesn't have to be this big, dramatic. It doesn't have to be a key. It doesn't have to be something big. It can just be something simple. Earlier this week, I was having a really bad day. And my former roommate from last year, she came to me and she knocked on my door and she gave me a candy cane chapstick. You know how they sell like those candy cane peppermint flavored chapsticks around Christmas time? That's the one thing I do stockpile. I buy tons of those things around Christmas time to last me throughout the year because that's the one kind of chapstick that I really like. And she gave it to me, and I was having a terrible day. And she knocked on my door and she gave me a peppermint chapstick because it's seasonal and it's coming around right now, right? That's the season it's coming to. And she said, I wanted to get this for you because I know you like it and because I care for you. And that's it. It can literally be, your omer can literally be a peppermint flavored chapstick that comes around once a year. It doesn't have to be a key. It doesn't have to be a house. It can be anything. But I do want you to think this week about what your omer is, and I want you to remember it. In a few years or due time, when there's multiple generations, I want you to tell them, this is my omer, and I want you to read them the story of Exodus 16 and tell them, this is for me in my life, what God did for me when I was in the wilderness. So that is your homework, okay? To finish off, we had a chapel speaker come in this week. She was great. Her name was Meredith Summer. She's a Howard Payne grad of 2008. She went on to go to seminary at Truett. It was really encouraging to me to hear that she finished seminary and that she went to Howard Payne and was adequately prepared. That was really encouraging. And now she's serving at a local church. But she was wonderful. And she actually talked about numbers. And I debated doing that today too. But this is basically when the Israelites complain. This is after their 40 years of eating manna was up. And they literally say, like, we would rather eat the food that we had in Egypt than this manna. But anyway, she preached a message on that, which was really cool because it was kind of the antithesis of what I'm talking of today. But it also gave me things that I can use in my paper, and I will. But she said this. She said, in the wilderness, we are called to gratitude. And she said, perhaps the reason that they were in the wilderness for so long is because they refused to be grateful. But here's the deal. I want you to remember that and take that home with you too. But here's the deal. When you are in the wilderness and you feel like you don't know anything and you can't remember who God is or what he's doing in your life, your omer will help you be grateful. So I want you to think of your life, what it is, find your omer, and never forget it, because when you are in the wilderness and you are called to be grateful and you don't know how and you don't know what that looks like, you can pull it out or think of it, whatever it is, right? And say, this is how God provided for me, and this is how he cared for me when I was in the hardest parts of my life. I want you to take that home with you. Before I leave you, before we take communion here in a few moments, I also wanted to share something that has been really meaningful to me. It's in Luke. I'm an Old Testament gal, but I do like going to the New Testament. I've been reading through all the Gospels for a class I'm in this semester, and it's been really neat seeing everything. But a part of Luke's Gospel that I've been turning to for a little over a week now, every day, and just praying over, is Jesus. It's in Luke's Gospel when Jesus is praying on the Mount of Olives. And he says, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And as we prepare our hearts and our minds for communion, which I hope you do, it's not just something we do once a month. It is so much more than that, right? The Eucharist is so important. I want you to think of what the cup is in your life that you want Jesus to remove from you. Because I've been doing that a lot lately. I've been praying, Lord, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. There's been a hardness in my heart and a bitterness that I can't get rid of. And I've been praying, Lord, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. And so we're going to do that soon, right? We're going to literally have the cup that is Jesus' blood, and we're going to take the Holy Communion. And I want you to think and pray over that. You know, we do have time after we take communion for prayer. I want you to think about what it is. What is that cup that you want Jesus to remove from you? Because as he was in the garden, he knew his crucifixion was essentially upon him at that point. He was just spending his last few moments praying to the Father. He said, if you are willing, take this cup from me. And God didn't, right? Because Jesus was crucified, but he was crucified so that we could take communion, so that we could know the Father, so that our sins would be forgiven, right? But I do want you in our time of communion, as we are preparing, Get your heart centered on God, but I want you to pray, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And I want you to think, what is the cup in your life that you need God to remove from you? I've noticed I've had a few this past season. It's been hard, but pray that he removes the cup from you. And when you're going up for communion and you literally have the blood of Christ in front of you, I want you to think about it and let it sink in and let God take it from you. If you pray earnestly for him to take it from you, he will. And then don't take it back in a week because you feel like you need it to function. Ask him to remove whatever cup, whatever it is in your heart from you. And I want you to do that, especially as we are moving into this time of Holy Communion. But I do ask that you bow with me as I lead us out in a word of prayer. Father God, I thank you so much for who you are and for how much you love us, even when we are a people in the wilderness who are bitter and who complain, God. Because even when they did that, you heard their complaining and you provided from them, or you provided for them. And I thank you for this great and mighty love that you have for us and all the things that you do for us. I pray that as we leave here, we think about what the cup is in our lives that we need to have removed. And I also pray that you help us to remember what our omer is going to be. The symbol of your love and your provision for us, even when things are rough. But I do pray now, as we are moving into a time of communion, that you prepare all of our hearts, that we remember this isn't something we do once a month because we have to put it on our church agenda and do it and check it off. It's something that we do to remember you and to remember what Jesus did, the pain that he went through, all because of his love for us, all because he wanted a chance to know us, God. I thank you for that. I pray that you help us to remember that and prepare our hearts for that, and that you bless the Holy Communion in the words that have been spoken today. It's in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.